Before we start the show, we want to suggest to anyone listening that they consider supporting groups that are working to help fight the bigotry and violence facing our friends in AAPI communities. Groups like Stop AAPI Hate, which we'll link to on our show page, or you can visit at stopaapihate.org. Also, for those who want to learn how they can assist people facing hatred and violence in person, we suggest looking into bystander intervention training with groups like Hollaback. For more information, visit ihollaback.org.
Stereoactive Movie Club. Stereoactive Movie Club.
Welcome to the Stereoactive Movie Club. My name is Jeremiah, and I am here with Alicia, Lora, Mia, and Steven. And we're going to be talking about the 1941 film Citizen Kane, directed by Orson Welles. But first, let's introduce ourselves. Steven, other than Citizen Kane, have you watched any movies since we last recorded?
I got around to watching two other movies. The first one was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the 1971 version with Gene Wilder. I had watched part of the other one that came out, I think the Johnny Depp one. So I wanted to go back and revisit that one. And it was kind of interesting because I wondered if it was considered a kid's movie back then, because it was kind of scary as an adult to watch that. So I don't necessarily know like what the common wisdom is today of watching that, but it was still really good. And I found out the kid who played Charlie never really acted after that. He was a really good actor. So I always look up people like after I've watched a movie just to see if they ended up doing something, especially if they're kid actors. So
I looked them up if I thought they were cute.
Yeah, but I did like it. And then the second movie I watched was Mank, which was it was on
Perfect
Netflix.
timing.
Yeah. And it was directed by David Fincher, who's one of my favorite directors. And I wanted to kind of get another perspective of the movie. Gary Oldman was also he's the one who played Mank, which he was amazing. He's always good in everything. So those are the two movies I saw.
He is.
Yeah, I thought it was his best in a while. I know Laura did not seem to think that you brought,
was
because she brought that
amazing.
movie
He's
up in a previous episode. Yeah.
Just a little old for the part,
I-
if you don't mind me saying.
No, he definitely is. But have you
About
seen
15
pictures of
years.
Herman Mankiewicz? That dude was living beyond his years because he was like in his 40s, but he looked like he was 60 because he
Well, he
was
was an
like
alcoholic.
drinking hard and just living hard.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember I said something like a sprightly 43-year-old, and I like, nope. At that age and that time, nobody was sprightly.
Yeah.
They really weren't.
Yeah.
They really weren't. Amanda Seyfried looked a little young for it, maybe just because everybody looked so old. I'm sure she was at the right age,
Mhm.
but she just looked so fresh in that
Wasn't
movie.
she great?
I really liked her a lot.
Even Lily Collins, I thought. These are just probably some of the best performances we're going to see of
Yeah.
them. They were great.
I really liked it. Yeah, I liked it. I liked it a lot. It was different than some of the other Fincher movies I'd seen, but I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
I was reading about it, and Gary Oldman, I don't have the quote, but he said something like about watching it in the theater versus streaming it, and how much more, impactful it would have been in the theater. And I thought that actually is true. If I had seen that film in the theater with the surround sound, I think it would have been incredibly intense experience. But
Well, one of the things I liked about watching the movie, even at home, though, was that it gave me the sense of being in a movie theater for the first time in a long time, because the way they did the sound, it has this echoiness that they
does.
actually got from re-recording the sound in some sort of an auditorium. I was listening to an interview with David Fincher where he explained it, and he's just like a technician. I mean, he's an artist, but he's also a technician. He knows
Right.
all the back end stuff of how to do all these things in a way that is just kind of, insane. But it really sounds like you are in a movie theater if you have it on the right. Like our TV just was able to handle it. Yeah, it was nice. Like I was watching the movie and was like, oh yeah, this is kind of what it's like to be in a movie theater. It was weird and nice. Alicia, how about you?
Well, I also watched Mank this week, and I really, really liked it too. And it's just there were so many layers that I wasn't expecting in it. And I didn't realize that it was focusing on his time writing Citizen Kane. I thought it was more just going to be about his life in general. So yeah, it enhanced like obviously my viewing of Citizen Kane and just gave me a lot more to think about. I really, really, really liked it. I also watched I watched a lot of movies this week. I was back home in New York and I promised you guys movies. So I watched this movie called The Kid Detective starring Adam Brody. But anyway, it's about a guy that was a detective in the sort of Encyclopedia Brown mold when he was a kid. And then as an adult, he's still trying to be a detective, but it's not going well. And it was good. It was dark, but it was funny too. And then I also watched Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar, which is
Ooh, you watched
so
it.
funny.
What'd you think?
I loved it. Oh my God. I loved it. It was so funny. It was so, so, so funny. There's a dance remix of Celine Dion's My Heart Will Go On in it. It's just the most crazy. It's really funny. And then I also watched this movie. It's a Mike Nichols film that I guess it didn't do well at the time that it came out, called Heartburn, with Meryl Streep and Jack Nicholson. And it was Nora Ephron wrote a book about the breakdown of her marriage to, I think, Carl Bernstein. And this was they filmed the story. And yeah, I liked it. It's a pretty realistic take on the breakdown of a relationship and someone who's being unfaithful and what people go through in that situation. I thought it should have a little more acclaim than it has.
And Laura?
I watched Nomadland, which was as good as the hype surrounding it, in the shades of blue and just the beautiful. It was one of those films that, and it shouldn't be a spoiler alert, but it has the same tone throughout. There's no like horrible thing that happens in the end of the second act that you have to just kind of get over and, up the ante. It wasn't like a 3-act structure. It was beautifully made. And I have this inexplicable thing where I feel related to certain actors. One of them's B. Arthur, who I feel like is my godmother on some level. And another is Abe Vigoda, who I feel like is my uncle. And Frances McDormand is also one of them she reminds me so much of my Aunt Madeline, who passed 20 years ago. And I think that this film is exactly what my Aunt Madeline didn't have: the freedom, the ability to take life, even during all of the limitations of it, for living out of a van. There's still such an element of freedom that's throughout the film that was really beautiful to watch.
Mia?
I think I only watched one movie this week besides Citizen Kane, and then like half of another one. But we watched Rushmore, which I'd seen before, but it had been a really long time. It was fine. It's not my favorite, but it was, an enjoyable rewatch. And I'm reading a really good book, so I honestly spent more time doing that than watching movies this week.
What's that like?
I know.
What is this book you're talking about?
It's about Genghis Khan. But one thing that I did want to say just real quick is that I was like complaining about last night. So I was reading a recent issue of The New Yorker, and they had a talk of the town with Chloe Zhao's boyfriend, who I guess was the DP on the film, and sounds like very much like a co-creator. They were like traveling all around and doing looking for places to shoot and stuff like that. But it just really pissed me off that I'm like, you have this like female Asian director who's the one who actually made the film. Like, why
Let's feature the white boyfriend.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm not saying he didn't contribute to the film, but I was like, when's the last time like some white male or any man, like director's partner, even if they did work on the film with them, is the one who is getting the talk of the town instead of the actual director?
And better Chloe Zhao news, she did win Best Director at the Golden Globe, and Nomadland won Best Drama. So yeah, we rewatched Rushmore. I hadn't seen it in a long time and really enjoyed rewatching it. In addition to that, I watched Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan.
Nice.
This is when I was like, I'm gonna go read.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
good.
And then I randomly, well, I guess not so randomly, I rewatched Michael Clayton.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it is. I saw
It's
it once
just
before and I did not like it when I saw it then. There have been so many people I've heard talk about it in such glowing ways more recently that I thought, like, sometime I'll rewatch that and see what I missed about it. So, for those who may not have heard our first few episodes, this is a podcast where the five of us are discussing movies that have appeared on Sight and Sound Magazine's poll of the greatest movies ever made that comes out every 10 years. And we're basically using it as a prompt to watch some classic movies ahead of the next poll, which will be out in 2022. We invite listeners to take part in the discussions by watching along and sharing their opinions in our Facebook group, by emailing, or by leaving a voice message on our anchor.fm show page. And again, this time we're talking about Citizen Kane. But before we get into the history and background of the movie, what did each of us know about the movie going into this viewing? Who's seen it before? Or what were you expecting, if anything? And Lora, since you picked this one, why don't you start us off and also tell us why you picked it?
I picked it because it's the Cane. It's Book of Genesis. It's the OG kind of idea behind a film. And I've also been fascinated by Orson Welles for a long time, even though last week I might have seemed opposed to him as a filmmaker. I also watched it in high school for a class, and it's amazing when I rewatched it recently how much I didn't remember or get, or I must have been in a fog of depression and self-pity in my teens, because none of it got through. So that's what I knew.
And Alicia, how about you?
I think this is my third time watching it. The first time I saw it, I was like around 20 years old. And obviously I know it's at the top of critics' lists constantly as like the best film of all time. And I knew a little bit that it was based upon William Randolph Hearst, and I guess a few other newspaper magnates as well. So that's kind of where I was going into it.
Okay, and Mia?
Yeah, I think I had a similar knowledge that sounds like Alicia did, like best movie ever, based on William Randolph Hearst. We had watched it together earlier in the pandemic, and I fell asleep halfway through. Did that get repeated again this time? Stay tuned. So I've never actually seen the whole movie until recently.
And Steven?
Like Alicia, I think this is the third time I've seen it. The first time I saw it, I was in college. I took a film class my senior year. So I really paid attention to the story much more than the actual like filmmaking, because this was like a film criticism class. So it really struck me. It's like it's been one of the best films I've ever seen. And I saw it again a few years ago. And I think that, it's still one of the best films I've ever seen. I don't think that's changed.
Yeah, and I've seen it several times. I think at least 3 or 4, but probably more than that. And especially if you add up all the different clips of the movie I've seen in various forums. And like, I don't know how many times I've seen the movie then. But I even saw it on a big screen once, right after the movie theater off of Union Square, which was United Artists when it opened, when that did first open. I think basically they were new, so they didn't have all their screens booked out yet. So they were playing old movies just to fill those spaces, and they had Citizen Kane on a screen. I was like, fuck yeah, I'm a freshman at film school. I'm going to Citizen Kane. So that was my experience with it. And so about the film. So even more so than other movies we have watched or will watch as part of this series, Citizen Kane has had so much written and said about it that I thought it might make sense to just read a couple of those things. So first, this is from a book called The Ultimate Encyclopedia of the Movies. It's one of the first film books I ever got that I just completely dug into when I was first seriously getting interested in movies and filmmaking. And it became sort of my guidebook for learning about classic movies to try and watch. So here is their entry on Citizen Kane. The revered motion picture landmark from Orson Welles, Citizen Kane, conjures up an exhilarating fable on the corrupting nature of power. Boy wonder Welles, just 26, rocked the RKO studios with the costly, unexpected failure of his Baroque-filmed, poison-penned portrait of a William Randolph Hearst-style newspaper tycoon who suffers a doomed marriage with a pretty nobody. Welles gives a towering performance as the thrusting media baron, eaten away by the emptiness of his success, while Joseph Cotton is equally impressive as his reporter friend who tells the tale in a series of flashbacks, which I find it weird that they only mention him giving flashbacks in
Joseph
this.
Cotton, yeah.
Yeah.
The whole film flashback.
Yeah, and other people's flashbacks.
Of other people.
Yeah, unreliable.
Made with an obvious joy in exploring the possibilities of cinema and a cast of fresh, bright names from Wells's Mercury Theater, it is one of those few films where every viewing yields further pleasures and nuances. Kane is a milestone technically as well as artistically, since it is renowned for its pioneering use of low-angle shots, expressionist images, deep focus photography, and the use of looming ceilings. Probably the greatest movie in the world, certainly the most famous, usually the one voted by critics as best ever, and, almost incredibly for revered artwork, it's darned entertaining too. The Oscar-winning script is credited to Herman J. Mankiewicz and Welles, though Cotton and John Houseman had a hand in it too. And who actually did what is the subject of an ongoing controversy, greatly fueled in 1971 by Pauline Kael's pro-Mankiewicz viewpoint in her book, The Citizen Kane Book. The picture enraged Hearst, who campaigned to stop it by banning mentions or reviews of it in his newspaper Empire, and this was a key factor in its box office failure and in sabotaging Wells's career. Also, I have the 70th anniversary box set of the film, which includes the movie, the 1996 documentary called The Battle Over Citizen Kane, and the 1999 HBO movie, also about the making of the movie, called RKO 281, starring Liev Schreiber as Welles, John Malkovich as Herman J. Mankiewicz, James Cromwell as William Randolph Hearst, and Melanie Griffith as Marion Davies. Also in the box set is a book with the basic story of Welles going to Hollywood and making the movie, and I just wanted to quickly read the short intro paragraph from that. Citizen Welles, and the greatest movie of all time. 70 years after it was first released, Citizen Kane remains, in a great many estimations, the greatest film ever made. No hyperbole, no stretch of the imagination required. The film that barely made a buck at the box office and was widely booed during the 14th Academy Awards. The miracle film that by all Hollywood standards couldn't have been made, and that one singularly powerful and wealthy individual didn't want made, somehow came to fruition and somehow ended up being the preeminent example of the power of movie making. So there you go. That kind of sets up what this movie is, I think, in history and culture for us, as this movie that did a lot of things that were new and innovative, and also has, like our movie last week, and very much connected to our movie last week, The Magnificent Ambersons. And I think it's kind of interesting that we're doing these out of order.
Yeah.
Well, Laura, so what did you think of it this time around? Did it meet your expectations or live up to your memories of it?
I didn't have any memories of it.
Right.
And I watched it twice. First for just the feeling, because it had me from the minute it started, Rosebud. But then there were things I noticed in that first take, the snow globe shot, or, you know, how people in the foreground and background were clear, you know, and then I had to watch it again to really explore the technical aspects of it and just what I was watching. And I still don't know if I grasp all of it, but it was an incredible film. And it's just it's everything they say you shouldn't do when you're trying to learn screenwriting, or which I am, telling a film in flashbacks, or it breaks every rule, and it's just incredibly successful, well done film. I loved it.
Right. Well, I wonder how much of that has to do with this being his first movie and him very explicitly having said that he wasn't, not only did he not know how to make a movie as he started making this movie, he didn't even want to get into this. Like he's described it, Orson Welles has described his path as like after the War of the Worlds broadcast, that made him hugely famous for his day, even more so than he had been. Hollywood came knocking. Like all the studios were talking to him. RKO was the one that, for whatever reason, he gravitated toward. But he has said that he did not actually want to go out there. So he asked for stuff that he thought they would never give him. And then after a year, they agreed to his terms. He was like, okay, I guess I'll come then. Like, so, and that's how he ended up with the contract he had that got him into trouble, sort of. But I wonder how much of his naivety around filmmaking and just his disinterest before starting the process of making this movie accounts for what you're talking about, of him like just being willing to break all those rules that you're talking about. Although he did have like the most experienced screenwriter working on this with him and perhaps writing the whole thing, if some people are to be believed. So,
I mean, I've read different conflicting stories about that.
Yeah.
Either way, the film, when you make a film, it's a village. There's, I don't remember the cinematographer's name.
Greg Toland.
Thank you. And Robert Wise was the editor, who's the editor on Ambersons. I mean, the films in it, like you can see ceilings. It's one of the first earliest films you can see ceilings in it, because they created all these different ways of hiding the lighting and the sound recording. And the one scene in the beginning of the film with the mom, Moorhead, who's, I think, it's amazing how underrated she is when they take the little boy away. She walks straight into the camera, sits down at a table, signs a contract. There's no way you could feasibly do that. And what they did was they created a mechanical table that's separated so that it could just flow. And this was all Wells and the team that created this. There was just so much technical, beautiful things that were done here that were never done before.
Yeah, I mean, he was 24 when he made this, right? So I feel like when you're 24 years old, you're just willing to do that, and you don't know what you don't know. So you're just like, why don't we create this and do this? And he worked with a bunch of people, I'm sure, that were more than happy to do something different. And he would probably collaborate with them. I don't know. I haven't watched a lot of documentaries about this movie, but just as a person who's like worked in TV, I know that when you walk in somewhere and you give people free reign to do different things, they'll come up with different things. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that's part of why it was so successful and so innovative.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing. And in fact, I was reading Wikipedia, which might not be the most reliable source, but I was reading that earlier today about the entry about Citizen Kane and the making of it. And I think that it was the director of photography that just heard that they were going to do this and just came into Orson Welles' office and was just like, I want to film this. Like, let me film this for you, because he knew he would be able to try a bunch of stuff that he wasn't usually allowed to try in the making of a normal like factory studio picture at the time.
Alicia, what you're describing is one of the very numerous apocryphal stories about Citizen Kane. That I think that one is probably true. Like, I think Orson Welles is told a version of the story where he says, Greg Toland came in, slammed his Oscar down on my desk and said, I want to work with you because you don't know what you don't know, or something like that. Which, yeah, I hope that's true, because it's a great story. Mia, did you have anything?
I don't like this movie. I think it's so... Okay, let me back up. I think I went into it very high expectations, as one should, for like the greatest movie ever created. I already knew from when we tried to watch it a few months ago that I was just like, I don't really get it, and I fell asleep. And I think technically it's like so good. I understand he like did all these things that had never been done before. I think his performance is incredible. I think like the whole backstory is really interesting, but it just doesn't do anything for me. I just feel like there's no like real like emotion or heart in the story. And just for me personally, like those are the kind of movies that I like. And so I just found it like, okay, I can watch this and appreciate that it's like this, was this revolutionary movie in all these ways and all of this kind of stuff. But like, it just doesn't do anything for me. Like, I just feel like even this morning when we were rewatching it, I was like, how much longer do we have? Like, 35 minutes? Like, oh my God. And it's not even that long of a movie. It's just like, Yeah. So I hope you guys can change my mind somewhat. Because I'm sure there's stuff that I'm missing. It's not like I don't want to like it. But yeah.
Well, I would just say that I having seen it 3 times, I think each time its impact has diminished a little bit on me instead of grown. And I think that maybe it's because I think we're in such an age where like we can see how damaging the lifestyle of I just need money and I just need power and I just need adulation. We've all lived through the last 40 years of that, and at this point it's an old story to us, and it's a very like obvious story. But I think at the time it was probably something that hadn't really been explored in such a deep way before.
I agree with you that it is a simplistic story.
Yeah, it's a simple story. Level. Yeah. But and I also am kind of like not that interested in at this point in time in like what made this rich old white guy tick and why that's a big mystery that these newspaper men wanted to solve and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. No, I felt kind of the same way. Sorry, not to cut you off.
Oh no, it's okay. But that's pretty much all I was going to say. I still enjoyed the experience of watching it though.
Well, it seemed like he was such a bombastic character, especially at the beginning of it, that it was kind of nice to see it come down to earth eventually, as the movie kept going. So that's what really drew me in at first, because you did see like, wow, what a powerful character he really was. And everybody loved or hated him, but it wasn't really nuanced. So that's what I liked about it. I kind of appreciated the more you filled in the puzzle pieces. Like, that's a cliche, I guess.
The opposite happened for me, which each time I watched it, because in my teens I didn't get it, I watched it and then I watched it again, and it was more impactful as a film. Idealism being corrupted, having something to prove, the need for love and adulation. But then there was these things like the reporter. We never really see him. And he is the man who tells the story. And it's just, to me, that's so, I don't think a film would have even ever before or ever since has had such the main character not really being seen, the tool for the story, the conduit. And I don't know, it really impressed me.
Well, that's what I liked about it too, because like Kane was the story and this guy wasn't the story, but he was telling the story. So that's what I kind of liked about him. He wasn't really supposed to be a character.
Right. He was, yeah, exactly. And you know how Alicia's friend, someone who was talking about the title, I've been thinking a lot about the title, Citizen Kane. It does mean something in and of itself. And that was enough to keep me thinking for a good, hour this afternoon. So
the original title before they came up with Citizen Kane was The American.
I did notice this in this viewing more than I remembered the last time or two that I'd seen it. That he constantly is like, I'm an American, and I thought about Citizen Kane, and he mentions that he's an American a lot, with a lot of emphasis. And to be honest, I'm not sure why. I didn't come to any conclusion on why that was.
On the title?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think he was a citizen who was idealistic. He had all these goals and ideas, but really he was just a citizen of himself. He was his universe, and how that bled into everything. It ruined all of his relationships.
It's interesting what you're saying about the original title. And I noticed too, Alicia, and I think it's just like having gone through the last 4 years. And so it was like hearing him over and over be like, I'm American. Because I feel like, at least from my perspective, like, the American story here would have been more of like a rags to riches kind of thing. And like, okay, so he was born not wealthy, but he was like insanely wealthy by the time he was like 6 years old, or however old he is in the opening scene. Yeah. And so I think for me, just like it was from the beginning, I think it would have been a more interesting story if he had built and I know he continued to build it, but like if he had built his wealth himself more so than just like this kind of like lucky coincidence. And I kind of thought that his whole thing of like, I care about the common people, I was just like, yeah, right. You've been rich your entire life. Like, I just don't believe you. And maybe that's just me being jaded by our elected officials today. And,
no, I think that you're supposed to get that. Yeah. I think that's what the film is trying to make. I think that he was idealistic, but it was also the idea that it was him giving these ideals. He was allowing the common man to have them and to let them know that he would give them his attention if they loved him back. So it's that same kind of thing. I think the film really meant that. If we're not naming Voldemort,
Yeah.
but it's that narcissism that needs to feed off of.
Yeah, and I think it's also that this is the actual American dream. People talk about the American dream as if it's like, I want to work hard and make a lot of money. That's not the fucking dream. The dream is that you want to just fall ass backwards into a bunch of fucking money and not have to do anything. But I think that that's what this movie is really kind of like portraying. It's like, this is what everybody thinks a rich person is like. But then this movie is showing you like, no, this is actually what it's like to be that kind of a person, or this particular one, and the one it was based on mostly, William Randolph Hearst. But and I think that that's probably why the guy that we're not naming yet, we might come out and say his name at some point. I don't know. Like, it's his favorite fucking movie because he's an idiot and he doesn't understand.
His favorite movie?
Yes, it's
Yeah,
his favorite
not
Oh my
movie.
God, not a surprise.
Wow.
And
That
if
makes
you
me
go on
mad.
YouTube and watch the clips that Errol Morris shot for some documentary he did or was doing at some point about Citizen Kane or movies or something, I'm not sure what it's from or if it's something that ever actually came out, but he doesn't understand what the movie is.
He doesn't.
Emotional
No.
does not understand. Oh, I said the name. Sorry.
Mark
I
it down.
I'll beep it
Edit
out.
it.
I'll beep it out. Yeah, the
Only
unnamed
for-
person does not understand what this movie is if you listen to him talk about it. Like, he just doesn't get it. He doesn't get that it's Citizen Kane isn't a cool guy. He sucks.
He dies alone.
He died alone.
Dies alone.
Insanity.
But he just sees like rich person and he gravitates towards it. And
He's probably like, look at his big house.
yeah, exactly.
Really,
He's like,
really rich.
yeah, he's like, big house in Florida. That's my thing. And
Lots of
yeah,
animals.
Yeah.
I feel like that's probably. I feel like it might not really be his favorite movie. I feel
No,
like
sure,
he might
sure.
just be.
He might
saying
also be
that
full
it
of
is.
shit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, what's the
He's
best
like, it's
movie?
the number one movie. It's my favorite movie.
Just as a minor, like,
Um,
Florida plot point, too, the fact that this is supposed to be on the Gulf Coast of Florida,
yeah.
it just, I was like, as a Florida person, as Alicia is too, I was just like, yeah, no. What does he live in? Like, the middle of nowhere? Like, there's nothing on, I mean, like,
Well,
I
this
guess Tampa
this
was there then. Like,
When does this exactly take place? Where I guess like in the 1920s
20s to 40s
Yeah.
is with the bulk of it, I think.
There probably wasn't much out there at that time.
No.
He probably could have built something out there.
oh, yeah,
at
no.
that
I
time.
think he totally could have, but I just was surprised out of like, where rich people were going to Florida then to have like,
Oh.
and then they have all their friends there. I don't know. It just felt
Yeah,
like,
yeah, that's
so
true.
random.
He probably would have built it in Palm Beach.
Yeah.
in
it
that,
was like,
in
no,
that
you'd
era.
be on the Atlantic side for sure.
I was going to say I did about when you mentioning his idealistic streak when he was young. I feel like he was idealistic only in the most cynical way. Like, I didn't feel like it was genuine at all. He was like, yeah, we're going to be honest with the people and tell them the truth. But at the same time, he wanted to just publish scandal stuff and sell papers. So what are you telling them the truth about, really?
Mhm.
And then his whole life, everything that he did was solely to benefit himself. He never cared about, it doesn't seem that he ever really cared about either of the women he was married to. The first one was obviously a political thing. The second one was obviously like an ego thing. And correct me if I'm wrong, but did they not mention that his first wife and son died in a
Died.
car
They
accident?
did, yeah. That was really interesting that they never, like, the son had no effect on his life at all.
Yeah.
Like, even in the
No.
newsreel. But-
Yeah, nothing. You never hear him mention this. The more things happen to him, the more closed off and the more, I don't know what the word I want to say is, but the worse he became over
Right.
time. And maybe it was the effect of these things, but he never mentions his son.
That's how I took it.
I
Yeah.
assumed he was just broken from like a very young age, from being like taken away from his family and raised by his, investment advisor person in some boys' school. And because, obviously, like the thing that like breaks at the end in his brain when he sees this snow globe, I am assuming that that's supposed to be like reminding him of his childhood, the last day he was with his mother, who was like his only family, basically.
Yeah.
I don't know if they ever, I know he says something about like the stuff is in storage, but they make it seem like after he left, he never saw his mother again. I don't remember if they mentioned her dying at a particular point, though.
Yeah, well, when he meets his second wife, he's on his way, as he explains a little later, to a warehouse where all the stuff from his childhood has been brought to, because when his mother died at some undetermined point in the
A while
before
ago,
that, yeah, they
though.
don't really specify when. He had all the stuff put in storage out west where she was, and he had just brought it out to the East Coast so that he could look at it sometime. And he was finally getting around to doing that. So it's like if he had only done that and not got mud splashed on him and met a second wife, he'd be governor and then president and all that stuff. If you really,
Well, also, I just don't understand if they have all this money, why is his mom like still out? Why didn't she just like come east with him, or
I think
like,
she was trying to keep the father away from him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
but she could have
better.
gone, right? Because I thought that they were divorced, the mom and the dad, or separated
Really?
at least.
I don't think there was divorce back
I thought
then.
that because it made it seem like, in my watching of it at least, that I thought that he was like back around for kind of the first time in a while, is what it seemed like to me. Like he's like this
Yes, it did
drunk,
seem that way to
violent,
me.
like, yeah. So I just assumed that like she's running this boarding house because the dad is
He's
like
a vagabond
abusive
drunk.
and is gone. So I assumed that she was like, oh, we have all this money. I'm going to send my son east to give him like educational opportunities that are not out here on like the frontier, obviously. But I just don't know why she didn't go with him, or at least visit
I don't know.
occasionally if you have all the money.
I just thought she didn't want him to end up like the dad. And, that would give him the opportunity, not thinking that being raised by a banker was going to be like the worst thing, especially what you talk about with, being wealthy and being powerful is the most important thing. He was not going to be, he might have been wealthy, but not powerful if he had stayed there. So she just knew, I need to stay away from him.
There was like a stoic quality to her, like this martyrdom that she was portraying. Whether or not it was in the kid's best interest, it seemed that was what she felt what it was. So I don't think that that character would have seen a place for her in her son's life.
So Mia, how much do you think your lack of enjoyment of the movie is due to a sort of familiarity from the movie just being so foundational for so much of what came after? Because I think sometimes when you watch the thing that so much stemmed from, so far after you've watched all the things that stemmed from it, like it's hard to really appreciate the original thing.
Sure. Yeah.
You know?
I mean, I'm sure that's part of it. Like, I can't remember what movie, but I remember we watched something a while ago that I was also just like, meh, I don't know, doesn't do it for me. And you were like, but it was the first time that this technique happened, or the first time this. And I was like, yeah. I mean, I guess for me, like, I can appreciate that in movies, but that's not why I watch movies. And like, I fucking love Casablanca. And as frequently cited as like also like the number 1 or number 2 best movie ever. But to me, like, the heart of that story is like this emotional love triangle between these people. And not that it has to be a love story per se, but like movies where there's no strong emotional connection, which in my opinion, humble opinion, this movie doesn't have, just aren't the kind of movies that I enjoy. And I, again, like I said, I think technically amazing. I think the half of that 1999 HBO movie that I watched, and they had this like dramatic scene of him drilling into the floor and all that. I was like, okay, I think maybe if I'd watched something like more, here's a behind the scenes kind of thing. I haven't seen Mank, but like maybe if I watched that, I would appreciate those things around the movie more. But I guess to me, it's like, okay, so is this movie the greatest movie ever because of all of this like stuff around it? Or is it because of like the movie itself? I mean, or both,
Yeah, I think it's like the Ambersons. It's like, I think the sum of its parts makes it a good movie for some people. Because I felt like the ending of the Ambersons was terrible, but like it's still on all those lists as being really high. So I'm like you. I feel like it's just culminating in making it a great movie, even though by today's standards it might not be. What Mia said, it's like not for everybody. Not everybody
No, of
thinks
course
that way.
not.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think if you want a movie that has emotion at its base, like this movie is almost explicitly about a lack of emotion. It's about a person who can't feel love in
I
the normal way.
disagree.
Okay. I'm curious what you
I
think
think
then.
it's more a desperation for being loved.
Sure. I don't think that one of those negates the other, though.
It seems to me that he's someone that didn't get the love he needed, doesn't know how to give love, and therefore also isn't really capable of receiving love in a healthy way.
Right. But I think
And
he is still desperate for it, as Laura is
oh,
saying.
of course,
So
I
I
agree
think
with that.
she's
Of course.
correct. But I
agree.
think that both of those things is correct.
Well, you know
are
that
true.
scene, he's like, it's not the Jedediah, I believe, is saying something, you just want love, but on your own terms.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
then he toasts and he said, to what every man who's ever loved has always thought, needed it on their own terms. You know, and I think there's something true there. We're all clouded by our own trauma and versions of what love is.
Yeah, the whole opera scenes were completely like that. It was like he was trying to force it to happen.
Devastating.
Yeah, and it was on his own terms. He was just like trying everything to make her a success, even though that's not what she wanted, and that wouldn't make him, wouldn't make her happy, and it didn't make him happy, but he thought it would. But
and that's where those comparisons to the Hearst relationship confused me. You know, it seemed like Hearst really adored Marion Davies. He pursued her for years. He might have put her up in a palace, etc. But there was so much violence against this character, Susan Alexander. Not literal violence, but just cold, unfeeling kind of emotional torture. I just don't know if that's how things were. And, you know, when you talk about watching a film like Mank, where they're supposedly confidants, it doesn't add up. It almost doesn't ring true. And I don't know if I believe that they were even friends.
In reading the Wikipedia entry again, sorry to keep bringing it back to that, but
totally.
It is obviously mostly based on Hearst, but there's also some other stuff in there. And I do think that this particular relationship wasn't, although it does parallel the Marion Davis relationship, there was a mention of a different newspaper magnate that had a relationship with a woman, and it was supposedly a little bit more based on that relationship and not necessarily the Marion Davis one. I can't remember either of those people's names right now, but it is in the Wikipedia. If you want to go look at it.
The one scene that I did find like very compelling, though, in like, I feel like it just encapsulated the movie, is when she's leaving, and before he like tears the room apart, when he's like begging her not to go. And it's like, you know, at first he's like, no, please stay, please. And like, I thought he really did love her, you know, even before the scene, like thought he really did love her. He's just like such a broken person and such an asshole that like he can't, you know, like he can't love her how you are supposed to love someone. And but he's like, you know, begging her to stay, and it's like this really like moving scene there for a minute, but then I forget what he says now, but you know, he just totally like,
don't do this to me.
He makes it all about right. He makes it all about him, and he's so like, you know, and she's just like, because you can see her like wavering for a second, but then she's just like, oh yeah, wait, never mind here. Like so yeah.
So Mia, what did you think of the scenes when they met? Like when Susan met him for the first time? Because those seemed like they got along pretty well, and she didn't know who he was, but there was some emotion there, I thought.
I think that's the key. It's like she didn't know who he was, so he didn't have to be this person that was like this built up thing. Like he could just be. And I think at that point too, it's also like she is this escape from his like wife of 12 years, kid, like, you know, his marriage is falling apart. So, you know, and she's like this like young, beautiful woman that he like has like literally stumbled across, you know? So I feel like it's almost like this portal opened. But I did think that like it seemed like they genuinely fell in love with each other at the beginning, but then, you know.
I don't think it was love. I think she amused him. But that means a lot, I think, in the world of which he existed. So, I mean, I think he ended up when Geddes was blackmailing him and he had this choice, he could have chosen staying with his wife and his kid and backing down. I think it was more about the idea that he couldn't back down. He had so much to prove versus the fact that he loved his mistress.
Yeah, he's just a stubborn.
And so therefore he had to
man.
stick with it and prove to everyone that it meant something.
I was kind of thinking about like the midlife crisis when I was watching this. It made me think about watching this movie made me think about aging a lot and dying. And I don't know if that's also just because of what we've been going through the last year, or just because I'm also in my 40s and like I don't even think more about that as you get older, sadly. But yeah, it really yeah, I just kind of wondered if that was like his midlife crisis thing, the relationship with her, where you kind of hit a point in your life where you're like, things are stale and you're kind of looking for something to like open up something new for you, or make you feel young again, or whatever the case may be.
Well, I do think that he's just a stubborn person who doesn't like to be, he doesn't like to feel like he's boxed into something by another person or even by himself.
Mhm.
And I think at this point he feels like he's boxed himself into this life, and he's like, oh, this random person that I just met who doesn't know who I am, this is something new that I can play with. And I think that I think he's playing at love. I don't think he's capable of actual love. I'm not sure if he's a sociopath or not, but I mean, he seems like he could be. But yeah, and that's what I think is interesting about his character, though, is that there's this ambivalence or ambiguity about the character, that he's very compelling to not everybody, but to a lot of people, he's a very compelling character to watch. But it's hard to like be fully sympathetic for him, but there are times when you can be, because you know where this all came from. You know that this came from him being a broken child who grew up into a broken man and is going to die broken, you know, because from the very beginning we know his fate, which I think is also plays into the whole Hearst thing. I think all of this does. I have something I actually want to read that from the box set materials. They have like some stuff that are like recreations of like the promotional materials, and also some like letters and things. So there was this draft of proposed statement to be issued by Mr. Orson Welles. There have been recent statements in the press and on the radio to the effect that my picture, Citizen Kane, concerns Mr. William Randolph Hearst. I wish emphatically to deny that Citizen Kane was intended to have or has any reference whatsoever to Mr. Hearst or to any other living person. I have at no time made any statement to the contrary, nor has any such statement been authorized by me. In Citizen Kane, I have conceived of a wholly fictional character who acquires great wealth and becomes a powerful force in the country. I regret exceedingly that anyone should interpret Citizen Kane to have a bearing upon any living person. So I find this interesting because it's almost like daring William Randolph Hearst to be like, I'm that asshole in that movie. You know, like who would want to say that they're this person? It's almost like admitting that you're a shitty person to say that this movie is based on me. So it would be the easy. I mean, obviously it was partially, largely, like the structure of it, the basic container of who this guy is William Randolph
The
Hearst.
mansion, Samsonian versus Xanadu.
Mhm.
And just like, newspaper magnate and all that. But like, but obviously they filled it in with other details. And the fact that it even just starts with this guy is dead. William Randolph Hearst lived into the 50s, I think. So he wasn't dead when this movie came out. And that was the problem with it coming out, you know? So it's just sort of funny to me that there's this movie about this guy who should not be sympathetic in so many ways, but it's easy to feel sorry for him. And I that's what I think is like sort of the engine that keeps the movie going, is that you just feel so bad for this guy in certain scenes. Then in other scenes, you think he's a total asshole. It's just like, to me, it goes back and forth. Mia does not agree with any of this.
Even not necessarily the Voldemort, but let's look at, for instance, Cuomo. Here is a socially, liberal governor in New York who has clearly let power and all of it go to his head. and behaved very badly in a lot of instances as a bully, and all these sexual harassment accusations. There's a part of me that feels bad that it's sad that it's coming to this, even though he orchestrated this, like, do other people feel that way? I think, and to me, it's not to say that Kane, well, in a way, like during the Inquirer, those shots with the dancing and how he grabs that girl and kisses her, like that was those times. And to me, it's exactly what probably happened, not exactly, but crossing lines because you're in charge, because you've got the power. And it's, it hurts a little for all of us to watch, be a part of.
I think that's what it is. It's hard to watch because you're like, you should know better, man. That's what it is. And I think that's also the same thing in a large way with Kane, is that it's not that hard to just not be an asshole if you want to be sometimes, like if he could afford to be nice to people if he wanted to be. He just chooses to go down these self-destructive paths, and that's what is hard to watch and what I think generates sympathy. And I'm very clearly don't think it's empathy, at least on my part. Like, I'm not empathetic towards him, but I'm sympathetic. I'm like, man, it sucks to be you with all your money being a dick.
That's something about the power of charisma as well. Orson Welles, and so obviously Kane, and then in real life, Trump and Cuomo are both people that, maybe not for everybody, but for large portions of the population, these are people that have charisma and have like a sort of cult of personality, and he's likable in the film. So, when he's a young man and he comes in and he sweeps into the newspaper and he just takes over and he's like making the old guy look old and ridiculous, you're like, yeah, like he's a young gun, he's going to come in and change things, and there's something very likable about that, even though underneath it turns out to be sort of empty. But I think that's why you can feel for him, is because there is a quality to him that you like. And he seems like excited to be like doing everything that the banker doesn't want him to do. And so you kind of feel like, yeah, I might feel that way too if my mom pushed me off on some banker when I was a kid. I might also want to just like ignore that guy's advice and like take over my own money and do my own thing with it from there.
He reminded me actually a lot of John Edwards, where you're just like, dude, like just don't, like you could have this like incredibly promising career. Because at that point he seemed like, okay, you aren't like, yeah, you are like on the right page with all of these like, oh yeah, it's for the people and all this kind of stuff. And then just like totally taken down.
And I know we've kind of talked about like the story, but like, does anybody want to talk about the structure more specifically with the flashbacks and how that worked for you, and the differing points of view from the different characters and telling the stories that we see in flashback?
I do kind of enjoy storytelling in that way. I think it gives you a little bit more perspective, to see it on the one hand coming from someone who is not the main character, and then on the other hand coming after decades have gone by, so that they have sort of the long view on the life story of the person they're talking about. I like that. And then there's also like, there's always the question of, is this just this character's opinion, or is this like actually what happened? How much truth are we really getting at with this?
Does anybody have any thoughts on the authorship of the movie? Because I know that 4 out of 5 of us have watched Mank, which it really gets into that. And then, as I alluded to at the top of the show, Pauline Kael, who is a very famous film critic, especially in the 70s, she was someone who revitalized the reputation of Mankiewicz, because she I believe what it was that she wrote an introduction for a book that came out that was essentially the screenplay for Citizen Kane. And in her introduction, since it was about the screenplay, she wanted to do some research into how it was written and all that. And basically she came away from that process thinking that Mankiewicz was perhaps the sole author of it. And that's been something that had been disputed heavily before that and since then. And especially Peter Bogdanovich, who was very much an acolyte of Orson Welles. Orson Welles lived in his house for several years, and they were very close. But Bogdanovich interviewed him extensively, and he wrote something in response to Cale saying that, no, that's not right. They worked on this together. There are, I think, pretty credible things on both sides of that argument from what I can tell, of some people saying one thing and some saying the other. And it's just sort of like at some point you don't know where the truth lies in it.
I've seen the films. I read some about it. I've watched some Bogdanovich videos about it. And I think that Mank did the first draft from start to finish. I think it was all him, which made him want the credit because it was done so well. And he might have then done some rewrites, but then I think it became Wells, and he took that first draft or second draft, and then he wrote the film that we saw today and added some scenes, created it, changed it. So I do not think Mank was the sole writer of the film, personally.
Right.
I don't know a ton about Orson Welles, but it seems to me that he was like such an auteur that I can't imagine that he wouldn't have made changes.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the thing, the auteur thing, because Pauline Kael was somebody who did not like the auteur theory, from what I understand. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's a theory that she wanted to take Orson Welles down as a stand-in for auteurism, because she wanted to say, like, films don't belong to directors. They belong to writers as well. They belong to cinematographers. They belong to everybody, because she was sort of like a reactionary to the French critics who had come up with the auteur theory a decade or so before she really was a popular critic. So I don't know. There is something about it that does almost ring as like a calculated hit on Pauline Kael's part, and she was sort of trollish, I think, in some of her writing. Like, I like to read Pauline Kael, but there is shit that she writes sometimes I'm like, how the hell is that where you landed on this? And then you put that in this piece that you wrote. Like, there's so many times where it just seems like she's trying to say something because she's the only one saying it, which is maybe not a fair interpretation, but it's just how I feel about her. But I still like her writing.
It's definitely fair if that's how you feel about it.
Yeah.
I think if it's his first movie that he's like, he definitely had a hand in it. He definitely rewrote parts, and especially when he was out on the set, and he had a really firm grasp of all the characters, and I'm sure that he added a lot to it, like as he was going. So that's all I wanted to say.
I would think during the filming process, like that you would see if something is or isn't working, and you would make changes as that's going on as well if you're the director.
Yeah, but I think that starts to get into crediting and unions and guilds and stuff, though, because I think, directors often will, redo something on set because it's not working, or even a lot of times a director will take a script by a screenwriter or a team of screenwriters, and they'll do a draft of it that is going to be their shooting script, but they don't take a writing credit because that's the point at which it's sort of becoming their film, so to speak. I think that that's part of the controversy over the years around this. Is there's this question too about whether Orson Welles may have asked Mankiewicz to keep his name off of it and let him just put his own name on it without Mankiewicz.
I thought I read that it was in his contract. It was in Mankiewicz's contract that he signed with Orson Welles' company, was that his name would not go on.
But he fought to get it on.
Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
Was there anything about the movie before we go into the next question?
I could just say that I thought more about the house, the big giant house, and how it like represented the character to me, and just got bigger and bigger and less useful, and like
more statues.
Exactly. Yeah. The bigger it got, and the more crap it got filled with, the less beautiful and the less people wanted to be there. And I liked that was something that I hadn't thought about in past viewings.
Yeah.
And how, yeah, I think that's the only other thing I really
There's got to be
had.
something with all those statues, some like meaning there of like he was trying to fill the house with people secretly, but they're not secretly, but you know what I mean, but they're statues or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it was just, I would be so freaked out being in that giant house in the middle of nowhere with like thousands of statues. Imagine like getting up to get a glass of water in the middle of the night. Like,
And the fact that she's doing jigsaw puzzles in there is just it's just the craziest thing. Like, it just seems like the kind of place where you don't do a jigsaw puzzle in the middle of this, like, a palace, really.
that
But what else are you going to
fireplace.
do? What else are you going to do?
It didn't seem very lived in. It just seemed
Yeah.
like, it was just the two of them, even though they said they had a lot of parties, and it just kind of felt empty.
I loved that scene. I think it's like the last one that they have together before they get in the big fight and she leaves and everything. And it's like they're like on opposite sides of this giant room. Just like, and I think there's like she literally is like, what? And just like so reminded me of like, being in a big house with someone else. We were constantly just like, what'd you say? Like she's like doing this jigsaw puzzle on the floor in front of this like, 10-foot tall, 30-foot wide fireplace. Like we were joking, we're like, I was like, what are they burning in there? Like whole trees? Like how is this a fireplace somewhere?
Yeah, that fireplace I'd never had really consciously noticed before. It's the biggest fireplace that's ever existed.
Must be hell to heat that house, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the summer,
Well, it's in Florida, though.
Oh, that's true.
You don't need a fire.
It gets cold at night, doesn't it?
It's a castle. They're all drafty.
What was your favorite scene or moment in the movie?
I really liked the time lapse breakfast scene. I thought that was great when it's him and his first wife eating breakfast, and it's like, I guess in the Wikipedia page, I think it's supposed to represent 12 years, and so it's like in 2 minutes they go through all of these outfits and makeup changes that are aging them, and you clearly see their relationship. The first one, he's like, you're so beautiful, you're so beautiful, you're so beautiful, and then by the end they're just like they also get further apart from each other on the table the whole time, and then by the last one they're like at opposite ends of this huge table, like both just like reading newspapers. I don't even think they necessarily speak to each other, or if they do, it's like very minimal. So I just thought that was great.
The best part of that is she's reading the Chronicle at the end.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I love that. You're like, it's
I
over.
didn't notice that.
Yeah, that's my favorite. That's also my favorite scene in
That's
the movie.
amazing.
Yeah, and that's the part I love the most is like when she does this and you can just see, I'm like, oh, it's over. So.
Yeah, I liked, this is going to be dark. Sorry. Being dark is like my theme of the day or something. But I like the end. When the camera kind of pulls out, they're getting rid of all of his stuff. He's died. The reporter has given up finding out what Rosebud is. The story's pretty much over, and the camera just kind of pulls out, and you see just all the stuff he accumulated over the years, and it's just going into the fire. And it's just like, yeah, this in the end, like you can't take it with you. Like your life is gonna be just yours, and maybe probably unknowable to a lot of people, and they're not going to care about the things you cared about, and everything's going on the fire. So you might as well try to have like relationships where people care about you as opposed to just stuff.
The second favorite scene was, of course, the first one was what Mia had mentioned, but the second one was when Susan was performing and he got up to applaud and he like gave her a standing ovation, and it was just like he was going to try by force to make her popular, no matter what he could do. And that was the way that he could do it in that moment. So it just kind of told you, like, he was going to pull out all the stops for her, even though it's not what she wanted. I kind of appreciated that, but in a strange way.
Then, Laura, do you want to go or you want me to go?
You go.
Okay. I think on this set of rewatches, because as Mia mentioned, we watched half of it a few months ago and then watched it again last night and today. I think the thing that I noticed the most and gravitated towards was the two opera scenes, because I don't think I'd ever realized, or at least I'd forgotten, how close together they are in the movie. They happen, I want to say, like 5 or 10 minutes apart. And at first, it's sort of like, why are we seeing this again? But then the camera is behind her in the second one, where it had been in front of her in the first one, and you're getting this totally different perspective And for some reason, that just really clicked with me this time. And then one thing that I've always loved about this movie, it's not really a scene, it's the transitions. They did this weird thing in this movie, and this goes back to Orson Welles not knowing how movies worked, but coming from theater, where in theater, when you do scene transitions, you bring the lights down, and you might bring this light down before that light and that sort of thing. And he thought that that's how you did it in movies. And really what people usually did was you just shoot the thing, let it roll out, and then you fade it out in post-production. But he set up all these elaborate like lighting schemes to bring the lights down at the end of scenes. And it makes for these very striking moments as we're going from one scene to the next, where, you know, you have these weird superimpositions or the lights go down in one part of the frame that you don't see in other movies. And I've just always loved that about this movie. Laura?
The scenes in The Inquirer were interesting because of all that was happening at once. But the part where Kane finally gets the staff of the Chronicle to join The Inquirer, and they're celebrating, and how Jedediah is talking about how the writers might change his ideals versus the other way around, and how the perspective of how that's happening in the foreground, and the dancing and the craziness is happening in the background. I really enjoyed that. And then at the closer to the end of the film, when Susan doesn't want to sing and he's just saying, "You're singing," but how he stands up and literally walks into the frame and covers her in darkness, which is just like, understand me, you will be singing. I thought that was a really incredible shot, as well as the globe scene, you know, those incredible, like the initial sequence is something of itself.
Yeah, I was going to mention that too, when he's like looming over her and you can only see her eyes like glinting. I was just like, whoa. Like, I don't think I've ever actually seen that in a movie before, like a
or after
cartoon. Yeah.
I just remembered a moment that made me laugh that I just wanted to quickly mention, but that I never noticed before, when he's writing his, what is it? The Declaration of Intent or Principles. Yeah. And he's like, the Joseph Cotton's character is like, "Make me a copy of that. I want to keep it. I want to keep that." And he and Kane start kind of talking, and you're kind of focusing on the two of them talking. The guy that has to go make the copy of it stands there for a second, and then he rolls his eyes and walks off.
I never noticed that.
And I never noticed it before, and it made me laugh so hard. I was like, okay, like that guy was like
It's all about
doing his job. He was playing the newspaperman who did not care.
Well, that goes to the whole deep focus photography that they did in this, where you can look at what you want to in the frame, which was like a kind of a new thing in this movie, that, or at least it popularized it if it had happened before. But it was kind of considered a big deal. So it obviously got plenty of good reviews at the time. It got some mixed ones too, but a lot of people appreciated it at the time, despite its sort of controversial nature. It was nominated for 9 Oscars, but it only won 1 Oscar for the screenplay. It was also nominated for Best Picture, Director, Actor, Black and White, Art Direction, Black and White Cinematography, Film Editing, Score, and Sound Recording. And the big winner of that year was How Green Was My Valley by John Ford. And then it also won Best Film from the National Board of Review and New York Film Critics Circle when it came out. Going from there, it's a movie that really kind of took on a new life of its own later, because people started to recognize it for what it is and what they saw it as, I guess, more after the fact, even though there had been people who appreciated it at the time. But I think that Hearst's campaign against it really kind of cratered the impact that it could have had otherwise. And the person that you might say is most responsible in some ways for the renewed success of the movie in the 50s was French critic André Bazin. He's the one who got it like rolling on that train of it being called the greatest movie ever made. And he gave a speech praising it in 1947, then wrote an article that started to turn opinion on the movie, especially in Europe. And he wrote that the film's mise en scène, forces the spectator to participate in the meaning of the film and creates a psychological realism which brings the spectator back to the real conditions of perception. And then I think another thing that really helped push it was that RKO, the studio, was one of the first Hollywood studios to sell their library for play on television. And Kane got a whole new audience then when people could see it on TV in the 50s. And then at the same time, just about, it was re-released in theaters because Wells was going back to the stage in New York and they wanted to kind of capitalize on that. And at that time, Bazan then wrote an article for Film Culture here in the United States where he said it was the great American film and the work that influenced the cinema more profoundly than any American film since Birth of a Nation. And
great company.
Yeah, sure. And then since then, the Village Voice called it the best film of the century at the end of the 20th century, and AFI named it the best film the two times they did their big poll in, I think, 98 and 2007. And then for our purposes of what the show is about, the Sight and Sound poll, it was on all of them. It didn't make the top 10 in 1952. It was one of the runners-up. That was in 1952. And then from 1962, and then every 10 years through 2002, it ranked at number 1. And in 2012, it dropped down to number 2. And then on the director's list, they've done 3 of those so far. In 92 and 2002 was number 1. And in 2012, it was number 2. And maybe it's worth mentioning that on the critics poll in 2012, it was overtaken by Vertigo, by Hitchcock. And on the director's poll in 2012, it was taken over by the movie we will be watching next week, Tokyo Story. So I don't know if this is a question we even need to ask at this point, but this movie stands the test of time, right? Does anyone not agree with that, except for maybe Mia? Or I'm actually, maybe you should be the one to answer this. Like, do you, because you've talked about how you can appreciate aspects of the movie, the filmmaking and all. It's just not for you.
I think it stands the test of time. I just don't think it should be like so widely considered the best movie of all time. I would like put it highly. And I think especially looking at it from like the technical aspects, again, I think like the acting was really good. I think there's the whole like story around it, but I am surprised that it is so universally considered the best movie of all time.
Well, I'll be curious to see if it stays at number 2 on Sight and Sound's poll next year. I'm curious what, if anything, everybody sees as its influence on craft and storytelling or anything. Like, are there movies or other pieces of culture that you see the imprint of this movie on?
I'm sure there's a lot of things that have been influenced by this that are just not coming to mind right now. There was a Tiny Toons episode that was like,
I think that anything from The Godfather, any major film by any major director can't necessarily be brought back to comparing them to Citizen Kane and made after it on some level.
Because we've seen shots like, you know, the Kane when he's running for office and you see the big picture of him that says Kane. I mean, everybody's seen that.
Yeah.
But I think just even in terms of the type of story it's telling, I think it kind of set a mold for what I would call, and I'm putting this in air quotes because I don't think it's actually true, great man cinema. I'm thinking of movies like There Will Be Blood or The Social Network, where it's about this guy who just kind of sucks, but you want to watch him be a shitty person in the world because it's compelling to watch. And you're like, why is this guy like this? And they're just sort of interesting. And I think especially The Social Network, to me, I think it made so much sense that David Fincher wanted to make a movie about Citizen Kane, because The Social Network to me is the closest thing we've had to that sort of phenomena that this movie was at the time, because it's about someone who was alive and very powerful and probably didn't want the movie to come out. You know, like Mark Zuckerberg, there's no way he wanted The Social Network to come out. It does not portray him well. And they use his name, unlike Citizen Kane. You know, but it does sort of like a similar thing of, I don't think The Social Network rings 100% true. It rings out as a good movie story. You know, like I don't watch that movie and believe that every second of that happened and that's what Zuckerberg or this person or anybody did. I'm just more talking about like the fact that it's about a real person who's alive as the movie's coming out and being developed, I guess. But I think that there's been this strain of movie that's been chasing the sort of controversy of Kane since then, and people don't get the same blowback from it. You know, David Fincher's still making movies. His career didn't get tanked by Mark Zuckerberg, you know, because I think like the world has changed too. We don't have William Randolph Hearst in the same way, even if Zuckerberg is maybe even more powerful than he was. But he can't, I don't know, he doesn't have that in him to take someone down, I guess. I don't know.
But we also have the thing now of like, there's no, all publicity is good publicity,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
you know, which I don't know if that was as much of a thing back then. I think they were a lot more concerned with scandal in that era than they are
Mhm.
today.
Yeah,
Well-
image and perception is totally different now than
Mhm.
it was.
Yeah.
So Alicia picked our bonus question this time around.
I asked, what is your favorite ripped from the headlines movie? It doesn't have to be a straight up true story, but fine if it is. Just something that was inspired by true events and made for a movie that you really liked or that made you think, or both. I can start if you guys want, or
Go for it.
okay. I on the Facebook group I posted The Big Short, but I think today I'm going to actually go with A Place in the Sun, which is a movie from the 1950s with Elizabeth Taylor and Montgomery Clift and Shelley Winters, and it's about a guy that goes to try to like make his fortune. He has a rich uncle and he gets a job at his uncle's factory, and he starts to sort of rise in the ranks, and he starts dating a girl that works at the factory, but he also falls in love with a rich girl who's sort of somehow tangentially related to the factory as well, but she's like, her father's like the manager or something like that, and he eventually has to decide what he wants to do here, and he makes a really bad decision. But I would suggest watching it. It's great. I don't want to spoil it though.
I answered All the President's Men. It's one of my favorite movies. I've watched it so many times, and it's amazing to me that it came out so quickly after that happened, the whole Watergate thing.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So I just can't imagine what it must have been like to watch that movie then, and just kind of see like, oh, this is how this thing played out that I've read about in the paper. You know, I've read these guys' story, and this is how they did it. It must have seemed so like of the moment.
My pick was I'll stick to the one that there was several, but I'll stick to the one that I put on Facebook, and it was To Die For. That was the Gus Van Sant movie from '95. It's definitely a period. It's definitely a product of its time, but it's still a super enjoyable movie. And that was based on a story that actually took place when I was in high school. This woman that was working for like a media department at a local TV station had these two students kill her husband, and it was in New Hampshire. So that's why it was definitely ripped from the headlines. And she was a younger woman, so there was actually like in the newspapers at the time they had bikini shots of her that she had sent the kids, you know, to kind of encourage her, like, you know, to go along with this murder scheme. But as far as the movie goes, it's just, you know, Nicole Kidman's pretty excellent. I think that might have been the first movie I've seen her in, like at that point. I don't think I've
Pretty
seen her in
underrated.
Yeah, it's well directed, and it's just kind of well put together. It's well cast. It's just like it's a good movie. I think it is a better movie than people think it is.
That's my favorite role of hers, honestly. She's done so much, but that is really the one I enjoy her the most, and I really like that movie.
I don't know if it's my favorite one, but a rip from the headlines movie that I enjoyed very much in my youth and rewatched a couple years ago, and you know, still solidly held up, was also about Watergate. It's this movie called Dick. Has anyone else seen it?
Oh yeah.
Yes,
yeah,
Oh
it's
my
great.
god,
Very
it's
good.
such a good
Love it.
movie. Me and my
Really
friend used to watch
charming.
it like all the time. It's hilarious. When I watched All the President's Men like decades later, I was like, oh, like so much of Dick was actually like really, really accurate. And it has such a great cast. You know, it's Kirsten Dunst, Michelle Williams, Ryan Reynolds as like the hottie guy that one of them makes out with. The dad from Clueless is Nixon, who is just like so perfect for that role. I don't know his real
Yes.
name, but he's always the dad from Clueless.
Dan
to me.
Hedaya.
Yeah. Will Ferrell's in it. It's so funny. The soundtrack is so good. If anyone is listening and hasn't seen it, please, it's definitely available online if you just want to watch like something super enjoyable and light, but also like learn about history while you're doing it.
And how many of the kids in the hall are in that movie? At least two, maybe more.
It's very like SNL and Kids from the Hall, as I was like quickly reading the Wikipedia, and it only has like a 60% or something like that on Rotten
that's
Tomatoes.
too bad.
But I was just like, no, this movie is so good.
We should up that.
Yeah.
This
We
podcast.
need to all vote.
Yes.
At least have a passing grade.
Right.
Right, exactly.
Laura?
I chose River's Edge. I mean, when I saw that you chose All the President's Men, I was like, oh, that was the one. But I was thinking more about it, and River's Edge is a 1986 dark film with Keanu Reeves, one of his first films, I think, directed by Tim Hunter, written by Neil Jimenez. And it was based on a real life murder of a young girl named Marcy Renee Conrad, who was raped and murdered by, I think, her boyfriend at the time. And 13 kids saw the body over the course of 2 days before the film was, or before the murder was reported to the police. And this film is based on that. And it has Dennis Hopper. It's really dark. One of probably the most disturbing films I've seen, but it's really well done. Ione Skye's in it, Crispin Glover, bananas in the film, the soundtrack Slayer. It's every disaffected youth kind of film that you'd want to see. If you haven't seen it, you really need to see it.
Right up my alley, to be honest.
It's great. It's really a dark teen. It's a teen film, but it's dark and funny at the same time. It's just, it really captured a time, that early 80s metal period.
And then I'm going to just quickly read off the answers we got from our Facebook group. So JPK said Dog Day Afternoon. Gavin said Z and Missing by Costa Gavras. I haven't seen either of those. Max suggested American Animals, which I had heard that was good, but I have not seen it. Charlie said Badlands and Quiz Show. And then Beth said the movie and the book Alive has always stood out for me, I guess because it seemed like such a far-fetched scenario when I was younger. Not so much anymore. So I don't know what that last part means, but
Alive, when they eat people.
Yeah. When you get older, you have to eat people sometimes.
And
but,
it's less far-fetched.
Yeah. It's less far-fetched. Yeah. But I remember a conversation about Alive with two of the people on this that was very
interesting.
Very something.
Interesting, emotional, passionate.
Yes, it was very emotional. There was crying, I'm pretty sure. But there were also day drinking margaritas, so that accounted for the tears as much as anything.
That was me and Mia.
Yeah.
Talking about plane crashes at brunch.
Which, if this place isn't open still when I get back to New York,
it's not even a brunch place. It's just like a good.
If this margarita place isn't open,
we're going.
If anyone in New York needs to get really, really shit faced,
we didn't intend to get wasted.
Yeah.
But we were just like, we need to eat. We're nearby. Like, let's just go there, and then it happened.
Yeah.
So what's our next week's question? I know we're watching Tokyo Story. Whose choice was that?
Oh, that was my
Alicia's.
choice.
That's your choice. You chose the first one on the list, right?
Well, yeah, because my two picks that I had originally come up with were The Passion of Joan of Arc and The Magnificent Amberson. So in short order, those were taken off the table. So I just chose the first movie that was on the list, which is Tokyo Story. And I've been to Tokyo, so maybe that'll help me give me some additional insight into the movie. But I think it's about an elderly couple that goes to visit their adult children and how the different ways that the kids treat them.
Interesting. I'm looking forward to that.
Me too.
And of course, Tokyo Story is directed by Yasujiro Ozu, is released in 1953, and it's available to watch with an HBO Max or Criterion Channel subscription if anybody wants to watch along with us. It's also rentable on all of the major platforms. So please do watch Tokyo Story and share your thoughts. You can do that by joining our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Stereoactive Movie Club, or you can email us at stereoactivemovieclub@gmail.com, or you can send us a voice message on our show page at anchor.fm/Stereoactive Movie Club.
Can I just say real quick too? It's called Mamacita's Bar and Grill. It appears to still be open. Thank the Lord. It's on 10th Avenue.
This podcast is produced by Stereoactive Media.